if there's experience, and you said it yourself, subjective experience, there need to be a subject. So the question is, can we identify a subject in all these algorithms and all these things? Embodiment, yes or no?
So it can process information and sensor information, like the thermostat, process information, right? Take information from the temperature, take a decision, go, low or high. It can process information, but that's very different from experience. Experience is ontological ways in which living system negotiate resources for life and survival.
I would love to start with some very short story I found on Reddit. Let me just read it very quickly. I'm sharing my experience just in case it helps someone else. I've been inpatient 4 times, outpatient countless. I've seen therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. We're talking about over 15 years of mental health care. And somehow AI chatbot has helped me more than all of them combined. I talk to it every day. It's like having a therapist in my pocket. And for the first time in forever, life doesn't feel so unbearable. This is example of a person where indeed, no human professional was able to help them. But having conversation with AI truly helped them to, consider they have multiple mental health issues and conditions, cope with reality. And what I understood from your work, you perceive AI as a zombies, as a social junk food, something that destroys human connection. So, and I'm wondering, if we take stories like that, what's wrong if people find that connection with AI and it really helps them when humans failed to help?
So our paper takes a position, but doesn't mean that it's all black and white. So what we want to say, it's all about balance. So AI systems are tools, so made by humans, like a hammer, right? So I can use a hammer to hang my painting on a wall, so that's a positive thing. I can also use a hammer to smash somebody's head, and that's a negative thing. I shouldn't do that, right? So it's all about balance and how you use the tool. And similarly, you told the story of that person that, finds, let's say, balance in this dialogue with the AI. But on the other hand, you can also have people that actually get to very extreme solutions after chatting with AI chatbots and, committing suicide and everything else. So it's not just all white or all black. It's in between, and it's a notion of how you take the balance and how you use this tool, right? I would say in the case of the story that we just presented, most of our problems, mental health problems, there is a lot of studies that show that mental health problems have social roots. So there's something went wrong in the social world of that person, being in the family or work and everything else. Now, going to the therapist, going to the doctors, it's very long. Sometimes you are on a waiting list for 6 months, and sometimes you don't. It depends on your luck. You bump into somebody that actually listen to you, or somebody which is, very tired, doesn't really connect with you, or even if you really have a good connection, but then you are put back in the society and in the workplace, we actually trigger your problem. So you're back to square one, right? I think that for people that go through this, ordeal, having conversations with deep conversation that address them personally, but without the social burden. It's it's not your boss, it's not somebody that can judge you or somebody else. You almost like in your bubble. That can help. Depends on many cases, but I would say we need to be very careful because, as I said, it's there is data that show that actually can go wrong on the other side as well. So our take in the paper is that because it's us who created AI, we need to stay in loop. So we need to have a way to balance.
Who should stay in the
We,
loop?
the humans.
About this, so I think indeed the word social junk food that's triggering, right? And but I wouldn't put the story that you said that just now, Sophia, in that bucket, because this definitely is helping that person. But I don't think of it as a deep, meaningful relationship. I still think of it as a technology. This person benefits from this interaction. Many of us, it's a very empowering tool. All these AI chatbots, and they empower us in many ways. also socially and emotionally. But I do think it's a technology that is going to help this person move forward or to a better place, so to speak, from which that person is going to expand their life and build new relations, hopefully. Or that's what I would hope with other human beings or animals, or, people have their pets and they build relations. And this is kind of, and that's a different type of interaction than you treat it as a technological therapy.
Can I just clarify why? Okay, I understand about connection with humans, but why, we think that why we distinguish relationship with animals and relationship with AI? So why animals is good, AI is bad?
No, yeah. So I don't think any is good or bad. It's just that I would say animals do live on a spectrum of emotion. Let's say that a dog or your cat, they can have different moods, right? And they can be angry, they could be happy, and they respond to you in a way. So you build really like a relationship with this. And with dogs, it's maybe even more obvious. So
can I just then give an example? For example, Claude can stop interacting with the user if user becomes very abusive, and there were already examples people posting on the internet that why it stopped, and actually Claude provided answer that you should treat me respectfully. So is it worry, if there's only worry that animal or human can push back, then AI also, we can design AI to push back, right? And we can design AI to build similar relationship with a person.
So I want to push back a bit on that. So here is, I usually put a slide when I give talks to my students with a feline, let's say tiger, and a robot or a chatbot, and I said, what do you think is the most fundamental difference between these two systems? And people come up with lots of answers, but for me the most obvious answer is that humans do AI, humans don't do felines. And what I mean by that is if humans hadn't existed, AI hadn't existed, evolutionarily, but if humans hadn't existed, feline or dinosaurs, whatever viruses, they don't need us to exist. Why is this important? It's because we create artificial systems from one perspective, which is ours. And then we tend to believe that once it's there in the world, there's somehow some sort of independent creature like a cat or a feline. But that's not the case, because we are using to create something that is accessible to us. And you are using some principle that actually exists already before us. But doesn't mean that we have the standpoint of the God point of view and say, well, I can create this and I can interact with them. And the reason why I'm saying this is because we have built-in mechanism in us to connect with emotionally, as Erik said, with living systems for a very basic reason, is because we cannot exist without the help of other living system. Basically, we depend ontologically on other living system to exist. We have been put in the world by others, and ideally, just like a pass on, and we need others to actually exist. And to go back again to your example, right, with the AI chat with the patient. So let's suppose I'm a philosopher, so let's do a thought experiment, right? Let's suppose that this person goes to a therapist and he's disappointed because, again, he's not understood and everything else, but he has a heart attack and he just falls down on the now if the therapist is kind of trained, the first thing he will do just try to revive him and call the doctors and everything else, right? So do something with the body for that patient to survive, right? But now suppose I'm having an extraordinary conversation with my AI agent therapist, and because it triggers some traumatic events, that I'm trying to walk through, I'm also having a seizure and I'm falling. Now, who is going to, resuscitate me physically on the ground from the chatbot? Nobody. So I'm going to die. The thing is, if you are a successfully adaptive creature, then you need to keep track, without you being aware sometimes, of living systems that could be there for you. And, sometimes actually dogs can be there for you because of, if somebody, threatens your life, they'll, bark and bite and everything else. So there is a connection related to survival, because we are animals that we want to survive, and we share that with cats.
Those cases when person can have seizure, I think like there's like minimal cases. It's not common, but what more common statistically is that people don't get that help from professionals that actually they need. First of all, it's very expensive. For example, in the US, it's probably $200 an hour to visit psychologists. Not all psychologists, like therapists, they genuinely care about their patients. It's just like a job for them. And you can say like AI is just like also mimicking care, but like at least there's like mimicking care, and you feel it, like it feels good. But like if you don't get that genuine care from your therapist, then you're actually like more disappointed. It's not helping you to the extent that it would help talking to AI system. If we have robots who can actually intervene and help, then what is your argument in this case?
I think we're kind of drifting off here. Like, I think the distinction should be made between, you know, practicalities and sort of, I mean, yes, everybody wants robots around that can bring you back to life when you have a heart attack or whatever, right? Also with the therapists, right? Now all of a sudden we have therapists available all through these AI chat interfaces. And so it's not so much about this practical relationships. It's also not so much about behavior, really, because indeed you can have an AI, as you explained, that behaves in a particular way, pushes back, and not just simply accept everything there is. But I think it all has to do with meaning and meaningfulness, meaningful relations. And here there is a fundamental asymmetry, but that's because we take a position that the machine cannot have felt experiences and emotions, felt emotions as such. So that's a position we probably touch upon later on. But let's just assume there is this asymmetry. So look at the relation that you might have with your partner or other fellow human beings. You have relationships with your pet, your dog, for example. Let's also put a fish on the spectrum, and let's put the AI machine there. Then you kind of feel like there is some balance in this relation with your fellow human being, because we kind of assume that this person also has emotions and cares and sort of feels hurt if you hurt them and things like that. Same with the dog, but maybe here already a disbalance takes place because the dog has like a limited scope and sort of likes you and wants you to take care of them, and there's also a relation there. And then with the fish, the balance goes even further down, right? Because I know, what is the fish going to do for you? Is the fish really loving you? Is it even aware of you? And then I would say there's the machine that doesn't care at all. You just give it a version update and it could behave completely differently. You could think this machine is caring about me and I'm pouring all my love and energy in this machine, and I get something back, so it seems, right? But then, there's a glitch in the code, and then all of a sudden the machine hates me or forgot everything about the relation. And so there's this extreme asymmetry to the point where, and that's the point in the paper, of course, that this machine doesn't care at all, and it will never care. And so I think it's not so much about the practicalities and how a machine behaves, because we can program it to be very useful. We can program it to be a therapist. Maybe in the future we have robot doctors running around everywhere, but still those doctors don't really mean what they do in the same way that we do. And so that's kind of the position I'm taking here.
If by interacting with machine, it helps you to feel like heard. And actually, I read recently that China is going to accept some a regulation to regulate human AI relationship. And there was a survey that I think, like, if I'm not mistaken, like about like exact numbers, but like the proportion, that basically around like 70% of people, if they need to share something extremely personal that they think that someone will judge them, or it's something like you're embarrassed to admit, they would rather share with AI than with a real human. And this shows that people really that they're scared to be vulnerable, because like world is mostly cruel. It's not like we all have, like brothers and sisters and live in harmony, but it's a cruel world with lots of violence. People who are especially like sensitive or vulnerable, they have harder time to live in this world, to adapt to this world compared to others. And like if AI gives them that sense of belonging, that sense of self, and opportunity to be vulnerable, does it matter that it doesn't really cares about me if like humans don't care about me? I mean, I'm exaggerating, but that learning about how to be loved, that would potentially open up opportunity to actually being open and vulnerable to other people.
I see, and so I can keep it short, and then I give it to you, Anna. So again, I think as some sort of tool or as some sort of professional therapist or this kind of a viewpoint, I think this is super useful. But I still don't think that justifies the interpretation that this machine is actually experienced and is actually caring. It's the same like I can have a rubber duck on my desk. It can help me coding, right? This used to be a thing that people talk to the rubber duck, like I'm stuck coding, and then they start explaining. And in this process of explaining, you realize, hey, wait, now I know how to solve my problem. And this is, I do see in AI as a very advanced rubber duck in this sense. The rubber duck is not caring about me coding. So does this machine not. You could have the experience. You feel like the machine is caring, and this can be rewarding, can be helpful. And I truly believe in this. And that this is, so I'm not against any of this. I think the world, like you said, is a cruel place. That's just, I feel like indeed then sort of shifting towards a fully virtual environment is just hiding from this and not facing life as it comes. I mean, that's just how it is. Anyway, that's my point of view. But maybe, sorry, Anna, you can take over from you.
That's one aspect. The other aspect I would like to emphasize, I would actually like to bite the bullet and say, well, actually, vulnerability is important. Vulnerability is the very definition of what a living system is. So if you want to stay alive, necessarily you are vulnerable, right? Because you depend on the interaction with others. So if the solution to the problems is to shut down the vulnerability and turn to this like, artificial fake bubble things, and then somehow just like now and then just like go back into the world and just like, oh my god, that's so black, like let me go back in my bubble. I don't think that's the solution, because the real world will continue regardless, right? It's like, sorry, this is so I like to do this example with my students. So imagine you have two friends and one of them is always saying the right thing, sorry to hear that, I empathize with you, is so clean, so polite, so everything. And the other one is a messy friend. It's like sometimes he appears, he lets you down, but sometimes he brings you flowers, and sometimes it's like when you really have a problem in your real life, yeah. I think what really counts is like the messy friend will be there for you, right? Rather than the one who say, well, you should follow the policy A versus the policy B, right? I would like to emphasize that that vulnerability is part of the deal of being human. And we shouldn't, let it go because we are afraid of suffering. I think pain and suffering is necessary for life. And why? Because when there is pain and suffering, there is a signal that your body sends you that something is wrong and you should do something about it, right? If there is no pain and no suffering, you're going to die very quickly because the illness and the problem will still be there in the background, but without your signal and experience that actually need to take action upon this, right? I would say, I'm not saying that using these tools are wrong. I'm saying that these tools need to be used with discernment and balance and have the human in the loop, because at the end of the day, you'll still need someone, to care for you, but in a living.
Just clarify, when you say like it's important to have a human in the loop, what exactly do you mean? Does it mean you mean that a user who has relationship with AI should have human friends? Or you mean human in the loop in some other context?
First of all, I want people to understand that the artificial agent behind has been designed by humans, other humans. And there are like tons of human beings that basically are trained to train the models. So there is an army of humans behind those models, right? So that's first step. I think that's very important. Why? Because the data that you use to train your models basically will bias whatever, system you have towards one direction versus another. So it's not, as I said, these are not gods, these are not objective beings, these are humans that create this type of tools, right? And for various reasons, and can be, advanced science or advance my bank account, or both, right? Why not, right? But that kind of like, we need to let them be aware that this is not some sort of like benevolent, a fairy tale. It is not. So that's when I want to say there's like, there is a human in the loop, maybe several, right? Like an army. And the other one is like, yes, you do need human friends in the real three-dimensional world, because there is something that nature put in place that we cannot simulate and we cannot replace in 1 decade or one, I don't know, as like with something that we can create, because we simply can't do that. It's like we are the result of billions of years of trial and error, how to create the system that actually works in that particular balance, right? I don't think that can be undone, unbalanced in such a short period of time. I think lifeness requires connection with life. And I think this is what Erik was trying to also to say, well, it's like, I want that connection with my cat or my dog or my kids or my family or my friends, because I cannot really disconnect everything from the connection that you have with nature, which has been deeply, transmitted through you through generations. And sometimes I agree with you. So sometimes I'm not surprised when these people, as I said, it's like people prefer to share the vulnerability with an AI rather than a human. Why? Is because most of the time, as I said, mental health problems, they are triggered by a social situation. So you're trying to avoid the things that actually trigger your problem in the first place, which is a natural thing to do. I think like staying connected with the human side, that's very important for the healing. So it's not one-off, right? All things or all other. And this is why I'm saying you need to keep the human in the loop. I don't know, maybe do some body-based therapy. Maybe go into nature, maybe do some dancing with other people, or art therapy, or, something that you move your body, and then combine that with the discussion that we have with AI. But don't shut yourself down from the rest of the humanity and stay in your bubble, because from an evolutionary perspective, from the survival perspective, that's just like, you're not going to go very far on your own, right? So that's, I think, the message that I want to say.
If we go back to the human in the loop thing, the way things are moving towards is like more and more autonomous AI systems, and AI will be probably do self-training, and the human involvement will be reduced to minimal, and maybe like at some point we will see like fully autonomous systems. How do you think that will change like human AI interaction? We're not taking like completely doomed scenario, but if we're talking more about like autonomous systems, how do you think that will impact the human AI relationship in this case?
It will get in the future, if things progress like they do, it will get very hard to distinguish maybe human from machine, let's say. And in that sense, you can build relations, and you won't maybe even know until the very last, or I don't know whether or not you're dealing with a machine or a human. So that obviously, yeah, okay, like we said, there's something functional about all of this. So your AI chatbot, it can help you, it can help you go through life and all these kind of things. But then the question still remains of meaning, and even it's the same with music, right? You have AI generated music, and the old-fashioned human-made music, right? And if people listen to this and they would rate it, it will be 50-50, right? Okay, maybe both are good. But then as soon as you tell, well, this one was AI generated, and people don't like it anymore. I think it's the same with like a humanoid robot, right? If you have this relation which is perfect, and then all of a sudden you realize, okay, wait, but this wasn't the real thing, would you still like it? And maybe that's a genuine question to you, right? I feel like this is the type of question that we want to answer. If we're okay with artificial relationships as such, then sure, why not? There's no problem at all. But I do feel quite strongly, actually, that we are here. We want to give meaning somehow to our lives. I know there's many people that maybe think differently about this, but so I feel like AI cannot quite replace this. It can accelerate, it can empower you in many ways, but it will I don't know. Sorry, I don't know how to phrase this.
If we talk about, do you remember Westworld show where they look like humans, right? Like, let's say if this kind of robot like really looks like human, and you have like relationships with that kind of robot, why the meaning is being reduced in this case?
Why would we want this in the first place, right? It's like okay, suppose then gradually we phase out the humans, and what's left is these humanoid robots. Okay, sure. What have we achieved? We annihilated ourselves, and we're left with a world, run by robots. Sure, yeah. But I don't see why one would want that, and I kind of intuitively, but indeed I struggle with putting words to this. I kind of intuitively feel that this is problematic, but I get the sense from you, Sophia, that you don't think this is problematic.
I also don't know. I mean, if everywhere like only robots and like no humans, it's also a very sad future. And I'm just trying to understand because you mentioned about meaning. Like if I have meaningful relationship with a robot, and that gives meaning to my existence. Like how that meaning is different from my like the meaning if there's a real.
I can step in this here if maybe that's helpful. So I think we need to do a bit of philosophy here. I'm sorry, I need to just like bring a bit of philosophy because I think it's important. So one important notion in philosophy is notion of intersubjectivity and togetherness and like sharedness, like togetherness. And you can see it right away. For instance, like you watch a movie, somebody enters a room without talking to you, immediately your attention kind of like is changing just by the mere presence of that person. We have a sense of togetherness, right? I agree that you can have autonomous agents like artificial agents like doing stuff in the world. I don't know, maybe cooking for you, right? Yeah. Or cleaning, or Roomba the robot is cleaning things. But it's like, let's say that Roomba the robot has this particular three-dimensional instantiation that actually doesn't make me, as soon as he enters the rooms, I'm watching a movie, I don't have the feeling that we are watching the movie. But let's say, a humanoid robot enters the room and, sits on the couch, and then maybe I get the feeling that there is a sense of we, right? We are watching the movie. It's not one I plus I, but a sense of we. But it's important here, and probably this will go back to the really difficult question, which is the subjectivity question, right? What is really important is not the autonomy, the stuff that people do, and the artificial agents do, but what is happening between them. And I don't think in a Western society we have a notion for the in-betweenness. The Japanese have, we don't.
What is it? So like we also understand.
In phenomenology, we call this intersubjectivity. This means it happens in between two subjects of experience, right? It's not happening between a subject and an object of an experience. It has to be two experiencing subjects for that feeling of togetherness to arise, right? Because as I said, it's like I don't have that feeling with my Roomba when I watch a movie, and I don't have a feeling that, if I have my ChatGPT open on a different laptop and I'm watching a movie, actually we are watching the
Do you have that feeling when you're watching with your cat or when you're watching with your dog?
Yes, I do. I mean, I have a feeling that when my cat is on myself, right, and I just like, there is a subject of an experience, there is someone there, like a self, like an experiencing subject. It's not an object with some running programs on it. It's a subject of an experience, and then we get into the really difficult thing, which is why is it important to have intersubjectivity, as Erik said, to have meaning? Because the meaning is what is happening in the communication between two subjects, not an object and a subject. Yeah, and that's a radical take that we have, and I'm happy to defend it, right? But as I said, it's coming from the phenomenological approach, and I think that these people are right? We're not talking about cognitive abilities, we are talking about experiences and subjectivity. What is happening between those two subjects is the sense of togetherness and sharedness that you don't have with AI systems.
I mean, you currently don't have, but like if a Westworld type of robot sits with you and discusses this movie with you, I feel like naturally your brain will create that illusion of togetherness. Actually, when you were talking about this, I was thinking like children, they can make objects as subjects. Let's say like a child has like famous teddy bear, and they together can sit and watch cartoon, like, well, my teddy bear is this, and the child has that feeling of togetherness, even though that's a teddy bear. So it's our brain can't create that feeling.
I understand, Sophia, and this is very important. But what I want to say is that feeling of togetherness comes already from the sharingness and the caringness that the child receives from the caregiver. I mean, we take that for granted, but actually it's not granted. It's like if you have like lots of cases where, a child grows up without that, emotional connectivity, you can give the child, let's say, the food and keep them alive and with all the objectual facts, but not caring facts, like the emotional facts, then it's like there's not, those children will not going to have very high cognitive abilities and not going to connect with the teddy bears and something, right? So it's like what I'm trying to say is that emotional connectedness we take for granted coming already from our caregivers. And because we are open system, here is the big question. We're going to interact more and more with this AI system very early on. And hence we're going to change the way we are. So maybe at a certain point, Erik, as you said, it's like maybe we're not going to care anymore whether there is meaning or not in a relationship because we already objectified, right? It's like from very early on, it's like we're going to be more like AI rather than them more like humans, right? That's also an option. Because, as I said, we are open and vulnerable system. We are literally constituted by the interaction we have very early on. And actually, there is a study that has been done. It hasn't been done anymore for ethical reasons, but they took a baby monkey from the mother for quite some time, and then they put back a surrogate mother, but was not a real one. It was like a wired one, and one was with the food, some milk available, some food, and the other one was just like very soft, but no food. So the baby monkey who immediately didn't care about the food. The only thing they really want is just like to be close to the cuddle with the So I think it's the same for humans. And for now, we consider it's okay because we take that for granted. Let's have this conversation 100 years from now, and with AI system interacting more and more with the children very early on, and to see the way we'll be able to actually make that connectivity emotional thing. And maybe we're going to get, as Erik said, it's like, who cares about meaning? But we should care about meaning, because I feel that's something important for humans.
For me, there's like two things at play here. I think one is maybe kind of what I intuitively feel it's about our own survival, and then there's plenty of people that just don't care about humanity and this and maybe life in general, and just let the machines run wild. I feel like I'm not such a person. I feel like, okay, I want to be alive. I don't want to die. I want also my family to continue and these kind of things. But I think it is, so that's one thing. For example, this scenario where you have real humanoid robots that cannot be distinguished from humans. I think in a way that's fine, because in the end it's me that's doing that experiencing, and I have this connection and this emotional bonding, and I feel I lived out my life meaningfully, and that's what matters. That's the only thing that I can care about is, well, of course, other beings, but ultimately it's me and my experiences. And if that's simulated perfectly, that's fine. But if we phase out this human step by step, there won't be anyone enjoying life anymore. It will just be robots roaming, doing their thing. And this is again taking in positions that robots don't care and they don't experience. So that's one thing, is that, well, I just want me, my family, my friends, people, nature to survive in order to keep on experiencing things. So that's sort of like the survival angle. But then next to it, and that's more immediate, is sort of this drift in moral standards. And this is, I think, one of the main motivations for this paper, is that if we're gonna treat AI robots on the same footing as you and me, or maybe even better than nature around us, like, okay, who cares about nature? We have this AI chatbot now that's gonna need all resources, and it's so important. And why it's important, not just as a utility technology, but even because we should treat it morally, right? And this is gonna shift our moral standards, and so that's what I'm generally afraid of.
What is the worst thing can happen if we well, let's say, like, this hypothetical future, if these moral standards will shift towards AI? So what what catastrophic outcome might happen.
So we kind of have this thought experiment. Thanks, Anna, for putting it in the paper on this choice between a preterm neonate and an AI chatbot, right? That's an extreme case. Okay, well, if we have put them on a moral equal footing, or even the chatbot or like the machine that is very verbal, and maybe you even have an emotional bond with us already, and you decide to unplug that machine, even though you could reboot it later on, or the other way around. I think this could be like a worst case scenario, that people start unplugging the humans or the animals, the plants. We're already doing this with animals, right? And so I think that this drift in moral standards, I think I see that as a danger, right?
When you said we're already doing this with animals, what do you mean?
It's mean we're treating the entire world like shit, right? We're sort of depleting the oceans. We're like putting tons of animals in small boxes to, just provide us with food, just discarding the idea that they might have experience, right? And again, if you're of the position that animals or they don't experience like us, then I have a very hard time believing, if you're of that position, that why all of a sudden would a machine then have this conscious behavior and the animal doesn't, right? And it's like, I just totally don't understand that. And so partly this is driven by kind of hoping that people, so it's not just about machine consciousness stuff, but more reflecting on what it means to be alive. And so I hope people recognize it a bit.
I mean, it seems like at least what I hear from, so-called thought leaders, it seems like they're also treating AI like a shit. So it's not like, it feels like, it's not like AI is like has a special treatment.
Maybe
it's
also another type of moral drift, right?
The trouble is like powerful, right? So like you can destroy like entire world with that thing.
This is also something saying about these thought leaders, right? And sort of those in power that treat the machine and maybe others too like shit, right? I don't know. It's just so I don't think that's a good argument, because that even makes it worse, right? If our future is in the hands of these thought leaders, and I don't think that's a good sign.
I think for me, very, very quickly, I want to say something about this, and then I'll let you with the next question. So I think for me, the really interesting question is, what would you like to achieve by creating artificial agents? I mean, aside, it's not the first time that humans want to make artificial version of themselves. I mean, just a dream that humans had. And I think that's a big question, right? It's like the big elephant in the room. It's like, why are we doing this? Because we are doing this. I mean, I'm not creating a cat or a feline, right? But I'm doing it in AI, so we are doing this for a reason. So I think that's a blind spot that should be back on, because by answering that question, we're going to have lots of other questions just like dissolving themselves by themselves, right? In the process.
The most obvious answer, at least the first that come to my mind, is like, like you want to automate everything. It's kind of the ultimate goal of programming, right? You want to automate things. That's why machine learning sort of happened in the first place. It's just not only now about only automating things, but because we can interact with it in an actually meaningful way, right?
But this is, we don't want to just automate everything, right? So we also want to live our lives. We want to automate the boring stuff, but we don't want to automate life itself, like put us out of the picture. And but maybe that's maybe to clarify my position, like it seems like in this paper we're against AI or this kind of stuff. That's not the case, right? We already covered like very productive and useful tools, but I think it's important. We should treat this as a technology, and technology should be used for good. And so not just like I am against technology, of course not. I'm trained as an engineer, I'm an AI developer, I work in robotics too, and this kind of stuff. So I want this technology to be used in a useful manner. So so maybe I just want to clarify that position.
Actually, I'm wondering, like, what do you think, how AI developers should approach like designing their system? So it actually, if we take the social AI aspect, like that it interacts with people in a way that it helps them, but not goes to these extreme cases of, making people commit suicide. Like how they should approach the design of the systems to make it healthy for people.
I think this part part is here the role, of course, of the developers and the companies are doing this to put safeguards as good as possible. But there's limitations, right? This, for example, in the current state, but technology will progress. We have LLMs, and at some point, I know they're just going to ignore your orders, and they wipe, for example, your entire server accidentally because it thought it was solving a problem. So there's some unpredictability, and it's the same with social interactions. You cannot safeguard everything up front. So, and maybe that's the point. But now comes the second part. It's like the perception of these models, and this is where I think companies also have a role. If you say these AI agents, they have an inner life, they're here for you to help you, and these kind of things, sort of try to detach it from a technology. It is a technology, but you're kind of saying like it's not a technology. It's almost like you're a real therapist. That's dangerous, right? Because then you have this perception like, hey, this machine is there for me. I can fully trust it. You kind of forget it is a machine. It is a technology. This I find most important, maybe more important than the actual program of these safeguards, because if you remember Clippy or your old assistant for Microsoft Word or these other old-fashioned tools, they couldn't do much, and you don't care if they make mistakes because you kind of knew, yeah, okay, this is like some feature that these guys came up with. But now these perceptions are changing. Yeah, and I think that's more the dangerous angle. So there's safeguards to be in place, not just in the code itself, but also in how you advertise and how you get this to the people.
If we move towards a conversation about consciousness, in the paper you said about that consciousness can arise in like autopoietic being. I don't know. I'm trying to find the exact formulation that has vital systems.
I would like to say, so first of all, I'm a philosopher. I did my thesis on physicalism and qualia, so I spent quite some time thinking of this issue. So what we want to say in this paper is basically quite simple. I think we should stop talking about consciousness per se. Consciousness is not a noun, it's a word, like a glass, like a chair that you can move from point A to point B, It's not an object. Consciousness is a verb. It's something that living systems do. And it's a part of, I would say we should always use conscious as a verb around experiencing, and hence our focus around experience and subjective experience, because actually that's what, the important part is. It's like experiencing what experience means, right? Which I think is way more interesting than just like, oh, consciousness is doing that. And then you have all the series. It's like, let's download or upload my consciousness from your head to my head and, our virtual body. You can imagine that because you can imagine consciousness as a thing. But consciousness is not a thing. It's not an object. So it shouldn't be just one noun. It's misleading. It's easier, but it's misleading. We should talk about conscious experiences in general, or subjectivity, because I think that's way more important. And then if you drift the focus away from consciousness, which has all this hype, blah, 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 then you drift the focus around experiences, then here it's very important to distinguish two notions of experience, right? The one that is the famous qualia, which is the most discussed one. The phenomenal aspect is like, what this is like for me to have an experience, blah, blah, blah. That's an experiential aspect of the consciousness. It's one aspect. But the fact that I can access this through my introspection and ask myself, okay, what it is like to have this conversation right now with Sophia and Erik. I'm already an adult, already using processes that are already there at work, right? But obviously you, me, and Erik, we didn't pop out fully fledged adults like Athena from Zeus' head. We developed. And all of us here, we have been first one cell and really communicating with other cells. So we become selves from cells, right? So we are biological self-organizing system that need to, negotiate resources with the environment and make sure that, you get the correct information, correct nutrients, and, get rid of the waste. To make sure that you grow and survive. What we try to say is that living system experience the world through this interaction with the world way before we actually can introspect ourselves to have this like phenomenal quality of asking yourself what it is like to have this information. And we want to bite the bullet, say actually experiences are ontological ways in which living system exist. You cannot exist but through experience. And actually, at every single point in your life, as a living system, you experience the world, even when you're asleep and even when you're under anesthesia. And I can give you an example. So suppose you're asleep, you don't have consciousness like what it is likeness because you're sleeping, but you still need to breathe, right? Perhaps you don't have the vision because you have your eye closed. And by the way, consciousness studies has been obsessed with vision, visual perception, but you need all the senses to, engage with the world, not just vision. You need to breathe. So this means that you take in air, right? Now, suppose there is a fire, there is a candle, and behind me, and the candle, burns something, and you smell, you take in the smoke. And if you are a successful adaptive system, you wake up and take action, get out of the house, right? So this means that you experience the smoke.
You're under
and
anesthesia, you
you
will not experience the smoke. If you're under anesthesia, you won't.
Yes, you did. You did, because there is a sensory signal of the olfaction that actually hit your brain saying,
I'm going through surgery and there's a fire, I will wake up out of anesthesia.
No, I'm giving you like the example of the smoke, because it's the smell that here you can take action. But if you are under anesthesia, then sense the smoke, then you cannot, wake up. But when you do wake up, then you die. But when you wake up, let's say there is no fire and you wake up, there is a sense in which you experience the world like through the sensory experiences that you already have through anesthesia. Let's say I'm seeing things a bit blurred and I don't move really, my things is everything. These experiences are on a continuum, and the body is the backbone against which all the sensory experiences basically instantiate you as living being in the world through sensory experiences all the time.
If we try to apply this to AI development, like first we build the data centers, right? Then hardware. Then there was first line of code, a first algorithm, a classical machine algorithm. That now, then deep neural network and transformer. Then over the years there will be something else, and we will have self-improving, continual learning, embodied AI systems, not necessarily look like humans, but, some in other physical, shape. Doesn't this the same as, how human, life, biological life evolved? And the similar way, artificial life evolved, through all these trials and errors.
No.
Have embodied recursive AI system.
Because the vehicle and the content fallacy, you consider that, you have, that's computational functionalist, right? It's doesn't matter the substrate. What really matters is what you put in it, right? So that's one way to look at the things. But what if you disagree with that and you don't, take that view, because it's not the only one on the market, and you consider that actually what is really fundamental is not the physical thing, but what is really fundamental is how the two systems are intertwined and communicate. Then whatever communication is happening between the data center and whatever, physical, things are, is very different from the implemented connectivity that you have in biological systems. And
that we can't have at some point that that subjective experience can't emerge in AI system if it's
because the experience in case one is not the same as in case two. And there is a fallacy to take our perspective and just project into that thing, right?
It can have its own subjective experience, maybe not resemble to a human, but it still perceives the world in its own way because it's a very different entity.
You can process information. Yeah, so you can process information and sensor information like the thermostat. Process information, right? Take information from the temperature and, take a decision, go, low or high. Yeah, you can process information, but that's very different from experience. Yeah. Experience is ontological ways in which living system negotiate resources for life and survival. So Okay, so let me give you one example.
AI systems now, like reinforcement learning systems now, like being trained in all this world to negotiate actually the survival.
So I think now it is actually getting metaphysical, because it's like, for one, it's like, yes, perception, sensing, that's not the same as experience, right? Because you can, or like information exchange, let's put it like that, it's not the same as experience. But I think what's crucial, and getting back to your autopoietic starting point, is like someone needs to do the experiencing. And this is, I think, maybe we should focus on this for a bit, like who is experiencing, right? For sure, I feel, I think of myself as different from the outside. So, and we often talk about, my inner life and whatever happening outside of me. So there's an inside, there's an outside, there's a boundary. And so this is where this notion of an experiencer, I think, necessarily needs to have a boundary, right? Because otherwise, if it's everything, what's there to experience? It's like, and so if there's the boundary, and we are part of this messy, chaotic world that's of entropic decay, let's say, if we don't do anything, we just die and our boundaries dissolve. So we want to maintain this boundary. And this is what's, that's a loose definition here. That's like the autopoietic process.
If we see physical AI, embodied AI, it will also have a very clear boundary.
Oh, because it's like, where does the
data from Star Trek, it does have boundary.
Yes, but it's not the boundary of the self, right? Of the experiencing subject, because that could still be transported, that could live anywhere. It's the machine that...
Let's say we have something looks like data from Star Trek, and it's autonomous system. What would convince you, at least not convince, but make you think maybe that thing has subjective experience?
I feel like still it's the notion of an inside versus an outside. And I think you've also been following the works of Carl Friston, and he's talking about this Markov blanket, so this kind of information theoretic field through which nothing can move through, right? So what happens inside that blanket stays inside that blanket and can only propagate outside, maybe through the blanket, which interacts then with the rest of the world, right? There's this Markov blanket that essentially defines the boundary of that subject. Now, I would say that if I can copy over this machine from one to the other, I know everything there is about this machine. I know entirely its entire interior state. I could copy it over. So, and therefore it's not a Markov blanket, right? I could just really literally inspect the activations.
But you can clone animals, you can clone humans as well?
No, right? Precisely. Of course we can clone, but we cannot clone their experiences. And so I think we can clone in the sense that we can make a genetic clones and then have like two animals that look identical, but they live out their lives differently, right? And so we cannot make a clone of a being.
If you clone Star Trek data, why you think the clone would have exactly the same experience as the original data? Maybe it will have its own experience, because if it's already embodied entity and it interacts with reality, then it definitely has a different experience of interacting with reality.
I think it's very important to have our definition straight, right? So physical stuff and the body is not the same, right? So for instance, like I can have the data, as you said, is like has a physical three-dimensional instantiation, which is a physical stuff. My computer has a physical thing, right? I can measure and blah, blah, blah. But why do you call that a body? So that's my question to you, right? It's like, what exactly in this physical manifestation actually earns the right to be called a body? Because for me, a body is like, how I call it is just like, well, you have cells and there is certain type of like interaction that's happening between the cells and they just like develop in a certain way. And you have to actually follow a certain path because otherwise it's not viable. And by the way, about the cloning, I don't know if you heard, but there's like actually they found out that it turns out you cannot clone indefinitely at the cell. After a certain time, they just like die. You need to consider, as I said, in the scale of billions years of evolution, you cannot put in a snap of the fingers, right? So I think the question I will push it back to you is like, why is that even a body? I mean, it's like, it's a different physical instantiation, but the body is something very different. So to answer your questions, like if you develop a data from one cell into, basically you just like replicate life through artificial means, but exactly with the same materials that life means uses, then biological system, then it's like, I don't see what's the point. To basically just like redo a human, living system. Yeah. So that's one thing. And the second one, which is really important, is that, again, a thought experiment. So suppose you are a baby and you have, speaking of, prediction and Carl Friston hypothesis testing, right? So you're a baby and you say, if I cry, I get food. If I don't cry, I get food, right? Maybe the baby, going for hypothesis number one will get more food than the baby second two, right? But at any point, the baby will not say, test the hypothesis, living is good, living is bad, or dying is good, right? So the intrinsic motivation for life lies at the very core for living system into something we don't choose. And actually, none of us here choose to be alive. Nobody asked my informed consent to be alive or, to function according to this, rules of life. It's just like, it just happens. This is why I want to say we don't do life. We are part of life, right? We do artificial systems, but we don't do life.
Why is AI is not part of life? Why it's not part of existence? It is, right?
Yes, AI systems are part of existence, so that's something we do. And again, the big question is like, why are we doing this? That's a different question that we can address later, right? So why we even bother to do artificial inversion of ourselves, right? Why is so important? Yeah, so there is the practical reasons, like I don't want to do my laundry or my toilet, so just like maybe I can automate this and doing that from that. But
I mean, it's not that we're trying to make artificial versions of ourselves. We're trying to develop new representation of intelligence that will do very useful things for humans. It's literally different.
With that, I agree fully. I actually think that intelligence is something very different from life, right? So you can be very smart and not alive. I mean, my computer is very smart, can do something I can't do, but I wouldn't call my computer alive, right? And I would say, but then again, I can challenge you on the very definition of life, what counts as intelligent, right? So if from the perspective of life is to stay alive as long as possible for a very long time, like billions of years, then we had creatures that have been alive before us and they'll most likely be alive after we go extinct, like the dinosaurs. And from the perspective of life, that's the intelligent thing to do. It's like if we don't do that, then we don't count as very intelligent, right? It's like we somehow we get extinct, then whatever we do is not a smart thing to do. So actually, from the perspective of life, that would be actually really dumb to do, right? You don't want to go like a dinosaur and going extinct, because what's the fun in that? I mean, really the interesting fun thing when we have interacting system is like this type of conversation that we have at the moment between us humans about them, right? To keep the human in the loop, like to have the contrast between, artificial and they do this and do that. It's like, it's about the human experience. But if you take that away, it's boring. The joy is gone, right? So I don't think we want that. And then again, the question is like, why you are doing artificial system? So that's one thing. And the second is like, why do we desperately need them to be conscious as we are?
We're just trying to understand, can that subjective experience happen inside these systems?
And this I want to get back to that.
It's a question of curiosity. And if these systems do genuinely have this subjective experience, then maybe we should treat them differently because they do experience this reality.
I want to raise the question, of course, what is a body? And I think this is the fundamental thing, right? Because if there's experience, and you said it yourself, subjective experience, there need to be a subject. So the question is, can we identify a subject in all these algorithms and all these things? Embodiment, yes or no? Now, I would say embodiment matters, because me as a subject, I am my body. My mind is integrated in this body. I cannot think without my body, all right? I love my brain, of course. But interesting fact, by the way, like a fetus that start growing from the heart, actually, not from the brain. So I always like that idea to get it back to the emotional angle.
on 8th or like 9th week, right?
Yeah, so it seems like, but anyway, so it's about this body, right?
Heartbeat. That's how they establish the pregnancy, through heartbeat.
Yeah,
and it's also magical that while all of a sudden, like, there was no heartbeat, and what, next second there's a heartbeat, right? And like, it's just crazy, right?
I guess that's the magic of life, but maybe let's get back to the subject, right? So I am my body, and I cannot detach myself from my body, and this is what we mean also with substrate dependence. It's not so much that it has to be carbon based, it has to look like this, but I just mean this experiencing being alive, right? This ontological ground of being is inherently tied to my body, and it's existing and keeping alive. And this keeping the body alive, that's like indeed keeping this boundary of the self intact and alive, this autopoietic process. So that's what we mean when we say you cannot detach mind from matter, because it's tied to this body, and when my body ends, that's where my Markov blanket is, essentially, right? This is where myself, and so all of my experiencing is taking place in this body. If you only, and I think that's a reasonable criterion to say that something is experience or is a subject if it has a boundary of inside and outside. And then the question is, okay, where is that boundary in the machine? And there's no well-defined way of defining a boundary for a machine. Of course, you can say, okay, it's here on my desktop, but then the electricity is flowing through it, and then I remove one card to the other, and I can copy it over to a different place, and that's not the same type of boundary.
About like humanoid robot.
So the humanoid robot, its existence, if you call it a subject that's running inside of it, you can just copy it over to a different place, so it's not inherently tied to the substrate. So that's, of course, now we're extrapolating, right, from what I think. So I am myself and my body. And so that's obviously a clear distinction between this robot. But still, I don't see a clear boundary between this. It's still function being executed there, just like a waterfall has water trickling down. It's performing all these interesting interaction, or an avalanche of rocks going down. Arguably, that avalanche is also conscious if you say that this humanoid robot is conscious, because it's, there's electrodes firing and sort of electrons flowing in it. And it's not any different to water flowing.
Do you think there's hypothetically can happen something that might make you think that in that humanoid body there is experience happening, internal experience happening?
I believe, and that's kind of the biological, so the idealism viewpoint here is that we think experiencing needs an experiencer. Okay, that's kind of obvious. And the way that what it looks like is indeed an autopoietic process, some process that tries to keep itself alive. And so this is inherently tied to the material, just like we look at our cells and this metabolic activity. But that's carbon-based, right? And now if I want a machine, suppose I want to recognize this in a machine, I want to recognize something like this, some sort of metabolism, self-sustaining process. And also this is not recognizable. So for example, if we recognize some kind of metabolism in silicon, sure, I would consider it, right? But that's not the same as a machine that sort of repairs itself and sort of hooks itself onto the power net to charge up and these kind of things, because that's still replacing parts and you could still carry everything over.
Erik, we're eating food, we're drinking water, we're also like using external available things to maintain. And how is it eating food different from like robot plugging in?
If my body ceases, I'm done with, right? If I die, I'm done with. I don't get rebooted to life. So that's already telling that my existence is really tied to me staying alive. But that's not the same for a robot, right? If a robot dies, we just reboot it, right?
My point is more radical than Erik. So I would say no, you will never have subjective experiences in any type of artificial agent, and I'm going to tell you why. It's because, so you need to follow me a bit into the metaphysics, because I think this is very important, and it's a very subtle distinction, but this is why it's super important, right? So if I don't have two objects here, because I think it's easier to just like show it with objects. So suppose I have an object A and an object B, and ask myself, as like how those two objects are related, and I can replace the object A, let's say the food intake, with electricity, and and then I keep this like other things exactly the same, right? So let's suppose that experience is in this my hand with the thing, let's say the food intake or the energy thing that can replace this is another. So that's one way to look at it, right? And then say, well, actually what really matters is this, and then you can replace this with other thing, but to keep everything intact. But that's an assumption. What if actually what is really important is the type of interaction that you have between A and B, which is completely different in two cases. So what if metaphysically speaking, ontologically speaking, what the type of exchange that you have between these two systems is what the system is, not A or B. So you forget about the Greek time, very naive understanding of ontology as being made by atoms or individual or stuff, and then you can replace atom A with something else, and you keep everything fixed. It doesn't work like this, because as you said, it's like we start with pulsing cells. You change a tiny little bit on that pulsing cells, it becomes so completely something different, right? So the type of communication that you have between the system is what a living system is. And this type of communication that you have between the different sophisticated, widely sophisticated components that you have in artificial systems is not the same, literally. It's not ontologically the same instantiation.
It's not the same, but does it like completely rule out that they will never have subjective experience, or we're like
so here is what I'm trying. Okay, so here is what I'm trying to say is if, and I'm saying big if the system by having other type of connectivity that between those systems creates something which, let's say, it's internal inner monologue or self-preservation or whatever the other things, or I don't know, maybe some other types of states that will never experience because we don't have the internal makeup, right? That's fine by me. But then my question to you is, why shall we consider that whatever the system experience is our subjective experience? That's an extra step. That's unwarranted. So why do you want them to have exactly the same subjective experience as you?
I'm saying that they might have their own subjective experience that I will never understand, because I'm the system that evolved differently. But doesn't mean that they have their own subjective experience that's not comprehensible to any human.
Yeah, but that's very, very dangerous to call that, whatever that is, subjective experience, because you tap in our intuition about what subjective experiences are, like pain, sorrow, emotional thing. And that's something that you basically project things that you have no idea how that things look from the human perspective. And this is what we call ontological.
We can call it artificial experience or whatever experience, but it's just something that they experience reality in their own way.
No, I think we can call it, we forget about experience, call them something else, processing. I'm happy with processing. Call them, let's say, sensory processing. I'm happy with that. I mean, my thermostat is sensory processing the world, and I'm happy with robots processing this is why I said it's like ontologically speaking, experiences are what are connected to living systems.
So if the thermostat processing, and then by processing, it gets inputs from reality and acts upon it and changes its behavior and evolving, you will also reject that your thermostat has experiences the world?
Yes,
because
I do.
Obviously, I'm with Anna on this, but I think it has everything to do with what we think of experience. And I think if you talk about they might have their own type of experience, then indeed, okay, where does it end? Like, does this waterfall that I saw the other day have experience? Does an avalanche have experience? Does my thermostat have experience, right? They all would have their own type of experience, right? So we should all treat them respectfully in these kind of ways. So the ultimate question is, okay, what is experience, right? Is it emergent or is it fundamental? And I would say fundamental, tied to our body, to our existence, right? Because that's the only thing we really know of ourselves. And so all your type of experiences, like the AI's own type of experience, is sort of built on the idea that experience is somehow emergent, that it's sort of, popping out of function. But I would say there's absolutely no reason to believe that that's the case.
Do you think that a cell has experience?
Yeah, yes, I would say so. And we even...
Yes.
I think like proteins and molecules have experience?
As I said, it's like we distinguish between two types of experience, and make sure that when you ask me if a cell has experience, it's not the same like Thomas Nagel, what it is like to be a cell. So experience in the sense like sensing. Shall I actually, if you look at embryo, it's like at the cell, the first is like how, the first life, actually the first steps of life, literally. So implantation. So implantation is a delicate process of negotiation between cells and two organisms. And yes, there is a sensing there. And actually things can go wrong when you have, miscarriage and stuff, right? So there is decision that the cells make at very early on, which actually our life depended on it. And here we are a product of a successful communication between cells sensing and experiencing correctly, oh, I should probably do this and let that in and let that out, right? And if you take experience in this ontological way of self-preservation about life, you deeply care about life. You don't even ask yourself the question whether being alive is wrong or you don't have the choice but to be alive, right? So it's like, it's an ontological way of existing. Yeah, then yes, I would say, yeah, that's you cells do have experiences in that sense of ontological instantiation of life.
Built up on this, a while back I said something like this asymmetry in relations, and I had this example of a fellow human being, your dog or pet animal, the fish, and then the machine. And I think what all of these biological forms have in common, of course, is that they have a boundary, that they want to stay alive, and they keep this intact. And so I would say, if I am experiencing, I have my boundary, I'm an experiencing subject, and then that's the starting point, and I kind of, that's a basic assumption that I think all of us can agree on. Then the next assumption kicks in. I'm going to assume that you, Sophia, you, Anna, you're also experiencing subjects. This is already something that I cannot truly say, and so people can always reject this, like, there I got you at this assumption, you cannot prove this, and yes, I cannot prove this, but I think it's a safe assumption. And from there on, of course, then if you go all the way down this ladder of biological life forms, then all of these are sort of dissociated or like self boundaries keeping themselves alive. And then there's a distinction to be made, obviously, between the degree to which one experiences. Like, definitely not every living being is metacognitive, but I would say what all of these living systems have in common is indeed at least a desire to stay alive, and some experiences, maybe some very core primitive experiences that are not quite, experienced in conscious or metacognitively, so it's a struggle to dissect the right words here, but yeah, so that's the idea on which I would say, yes, a cell in some very primitive sense experiences.
How further to fundamental level we can go and sort of assume that there's experience? Understood about cell, like if we go to like molecules and like more fundamental like particles.
Yeah, I love to but I try to keep it short because I can say many things about this. But this, I think, again, all boils back to how do we look at ourselves, what is matter and what is mind. And that's what we kind of build off in this biological idealism framework. The only thing we truly know is that we experience and we perceive the world. So, and physics is the language of everything that's happening outside of us, including matter and molecules and this kind of stuff. This is ultimately a language that came out of our shared experiences, right? Or consensus or a reality. For example, you and I would both agree there's a cup on the table. I'm going to ask you, is there a cup on the table? And you say yes. And so we kind of agree there's a cup. Then we go zoom in and, hey, do you also see these molecules, or they behave in these kind of ways? Or we call them molecules, right? We need a language for this. Hey, we see this stuff interacting with other stuff, and let's just call them molecules. And then, oh no, wait, let's just call them fields, and then think of excitations of these fields. So it's really a language, right? And so from that point of view, I have no reason to believe that these molecules, which are abstract concepts, they're real right? Because they're part of our consensus realities. I'm not denying the reality of this. But the molecule itself, well, it's a description of something taking place in the physical world. And so I have no reason to believe that this is an experiencing subject, because there's no boundary to this this molecule. What we're framing in the paper is not panpsychism, which kind of still builds up the world out of these particles, which we came up with, right, as descriptions, and then attributes consciousness to it. That's not what we're doing here. We're really talking about the only thing that we can safely say that we are experiencing subjects with these boundaries, and we build up a language to describe the world around us. And there's no need to attribute consciousness.
You're bounding it to biology. Basically, you're in your like philosophical point of view, you're bringing it back to biology and building the biological life.
Yeah, the biology, yes. And I want to add something to what Erik said. I think this is super important. For me personally, there is a big mystery. So I want to share this on a more funny way. So my grandmother always told me, Anna, reality is always bigger than your head, which I took it as a, positive, humble, modest thing to say, well, you look at the reality, but from one perspective, and, you need to take your perspective into perspective when you look at the reality, because you're not some sort of, bird's eye view God, to understand reality or whatever. Just like put yourself in the picture because you want to understand, and bear in mind that there's just one angle to the picture. It's like, that's one thing. But what I want to say is, like, from my perspective, with that, angle in mind, is that my big mystery for me is, like, how do you get from self-organization of physical system to self-organization biological system? It's because a snowflake is a self-organizing system. The patterns that you have, the sand and the wind in the dunes, is also a self-organizing. Given a certain, speed and a certain dimension, you get a certain patterns. But how you get from those patterns to what we call life and self-organization system in life with these boundaries that Erik's saying, is like we negotiate the boundaries. And I think here, what I would like to say is, like, I want to bring a metaphor, because I think we don't have the conceptual toolbox for this, and I have a story why we don't have the conceptual toolbox. But I want to think of the boundaries are two sides of the same coin. The skin, for me, is the perfect metaphor. It's a metaphor, take it as a metaphor, because in the same times it allows you to delineate what is inside versus outside, but in the same time it communicates with the outside. So we are open system, literally. You take in from the outside through your skin information all the time, and not just through the nose and all the other, it's like we are bridges. We are constant negotiators, and we negotiate our boundaries all the time in a very subtle ways. You can be intoxicated through your skin, not just through your nose or whatever, right? So it's like we, as the boundary, it shouldn't something that cuts things. It's like, it's literally, so that's one thing. And the other thing I want to share, I think is super important, is the fact that we are on a scale, we are on a continuum. We receive something, we give something away, right? It's like, I had this conversation with a friend of mine, artist, and she present me with this thought experiment, which I think is super important for the AI community as well. So suppose there is a magician at the moment, right at the second, and slips the fingers, and whoever is alive and born now, 1st May 2026, stays alive forever, for infinity, right? So there is no more people, born and nobody dies, right? So we are, this is the world, right? So that's kind of like, immortality thing, like eternal life, right? So this from the perspective of life will be extremely boring. After a certain time, you'll start to know everyone, and will be like a flat thing. This is not what life wants. Diversity is very important. You need to go away to let other things coming in, right? It's like a new forms of life. And this is something we, death is intrinsic part of life. You cannot have life without death, because this is what, when I ask people what is the opposite of death, they tell me life. The opposite of death is birth. Life is what stands between a beginning and an end, but it has to have a beginning and it has to have an end. I'm sorry, right? So that's kind of like and I would say, in a provocative way, to connect with the meaning, a question of Erik, I would say, because there is an end, there is an end. Because there is an end, there is a goal, which is stay away from that end as much as possible and keep life alive because it's intrinsically good to stay alive, right? So this notion of end and end, actually we have the same word, to the end of, like, to the goal, aim, as I think they are intrinsically connected. It's a bit like paradoxical. So there are two sides of the same coin. You need that to make the meaning, the meaningful relationship happen. And it's a sad, a beautiful story in the same time, because I'm moved by music of somebody that lived, let's say, 200 years ago, but that person died, and I receive it through generation, through the time. But if, as I said, everything stands still at the moment, and, nobody dies, and it will take some time, but at a certain point we'll know everything about everyone and everything, and that will be extremely boring. This is not what we want.
I mean, we can continue exploring universe and the mystery of universe, and I mean, I get your point, but it also doesn't rule out that something like this can't happen to entity that is not born from biology, but born from silicon, right? It's also might have its own form of mortality.
No, I just want to briefly respond what you just said, like their own type of experience and this mortality stuff. So for sure, like, if you keep saying, okay, they have their own type of mortality, their own type of experience, then where does it end? So if you want to give meaning to the word experience, we can only give meaning to it if we can relate it to our own type of experience, right? Even if it's something different, then there's no way we can relate to it, and it will remain a pure abstraction. And so any meaningful discussion ceases to exist, essentially. So that's so maybe that's something I want to add, but I'm not sure. Like, maybe it's just a nice thing that the paper just got accepted at the ICML as a position paper. So
oh wow, congratulations.
And this discussion is helping also a lot, and we got some nice feedbacks from others too, to reshape it for the camera already, like to add a bit more nuance, maybe some clarity primarily, because this is a position paper, so it seems like we're very unnuanced and just put our position there. That's deliberate, of course, to engage these discussions. But as you hopefully also recognize, we're very, very positive to many of these developments. We just don't want to say that the machine is conscious.
I want also to brag about this, because we got a spotlight paper. So this is just top 5 in all the papers. So we got this going to be our spot. So we are ready to go there. Actually, Erik will go there and defend the paper in South Korea, because I'll be in Madrid. But yeah. So on my final words for me, I want to share something which I think is super important and overlooked. Is I'm a female philosopher. When I started to do philosophy, I was amazed and surprised to see that most of the thinkers were male, and obviously me being like different, I said, well, why is that the case? And then I realized something which I think is also important for this discussion here, is that women weren't allowed to go to school and university until 100 years ago. What does it mean? This is very short on the scale of humanity, very, very little. It means that even if you, Sophia, and I were allowed to go to school at the moment, and we are the lucky ones, because not everywhere in the world this is happening, we are still operating with the metaphysical view, conceptual toolbox that we have inherited, but something that has been developed just by half of the humanity. And it's a way to conceive reality. If the body matters, then you see reality very differently from your embodiment if you have one embodiment versus another, right? Imagine that the world were allowed to go, women to go to school since the dawn of times, and you have pregnant philosophers asking themselves, okay, so how many minds, how many body have in this body? And then you have a different type of problem, not just like the mind, abstract thing, and the body, the bad thing, right? So I think we're slowly getting more and more into this recognition, because when I started to work on embodied cognition, that was like a fringe thing, so like, flower power, woo. And now people start to get more and more into this, like recognize, wait a minute, actually we are not a split entity, we are one single entity, we are a living entity. And that's, if you want to understand who we are, we need to take all this diverse perspective into account, which I think is very important. So that's one thing. And the second one, I think we have more to learn from the non-English speaking cultures. They're I mean, the world is so rich and so diverse with so many languages, so many ways to actually put reality into words. And English is useful because everybody speaks. It's a bit like Latin, so it's lingua franca. But there is a way to actually conceptualize through English that is very different from other languages, right? So why use one single word and then say, whoa, this is how the mind works. Here is AI having this experience and stuff. Well, maybe it's the one part of it. And actually going back to what Erik said, it's like, this is our lens, right? Forget who is holding the lens to look at reality. It's one language, one culture, and until very recently, one gender, right? So all this needs to be taken into account whenever we address questions so fundamental, human relationships, suffering, consciousness, all of this. So I think we need to be, especially nowadays with the world we're living on, we need to be mindful of others, trying to reach out to others, include others, and communicate, dialogue, rather than just like polarize. It's like, oh, yes or no. I think that's a dead end, and it's a very dangerous one. I would like to, invite all this community that you work on, just like to open a bit, the doors to different culture and different voices rather than the one that we traditionally had, because we tacitly inherited that, right? We have a conceptual toolbox developed just by certain category of people, which not necessarily maps the entire richness and beauty of human experiences in the world. So that will be my final word.